Good afternoon, Monsieur Artaud, and thank you for joining us here at the University of Washington for the workshop today. My name is Melina Dumas, and I'm a second-year law student here at UW. I have just a couple of questions relating to the protection of Indigenous rights in the Arctic. So Canada recently announced its full support of the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, although the previous government expressed concern that the evolving international norm of free, prior, and informed consent could operate as an Indigenous veto on development projects. So from your perspective, what are some challenges for obtaining free, prior, and informed consent in the Arctic context, and what are some best practices for going about this in a way that respects Indigenous values and traditional concepts of justice?
Yeah, this is actually an excellent question that you're asking. This UN declaration, we've been talking about that in Canada for the last 10 years, basically. Should we ratify it or not? That was the great question. The previous government, Harper government, had this fear that it would give a veto to Aboriginal community all across the country. Well, this fear is not away again. It still exists. It exists within the actual government. And the actual Minister of Aboriginal Affairs, or Indigenous Affairs, as we used to call it now, Carolyn Bennett, she still thinks that this could give a veto to Indigenous peoples across Canada. And that would, in that sense, prevent any development project that would occur across the country. So that's really something that we should think about. But there is a way to do it, and the best way to do it is to consult properly with the communities. And that's basically what the Minister of Indigenous Affairs wants to do. She wants to consult with the Aboriginal communities across the country, not only on how should we implement this new declaration of the UN, but how should you be consulted properly by the companies that would like to have development project in your community. And the best way to do it, in my opinion, is to go to the community, meet with the community leaders, have open, frank, and open-minded discussions with them in all transparency, and usually that's the way it works. When you work together hand in hand, there's no better way to work, I think.
Thank you. And so my second question is, so it's my understanding that there are very few Inuit lawyers in Canada, but there was a special program established in Iqaluit in the early 2000s through a partnership with the University of Victoria that graduated 11 Inuit attorneys. The curriculum integrated traditional Inuit law with Western legal concepts, and a second round is expected in 2017 in collaboration with the University of Saskatchewan. So in what ways do you think Inuit traditional law can be incorporated into the Canadian legal system, and what opportunities and challenges do you see in educating more Inuit leaders to be legal advocates for Indigenous rights, both on the domestic and international stage? And then just a follow-up question to that in terms of the relationship between Inuit traditional law and Western law is, how do Inuit and Western concepts of territory come into conflict, especially in terms of land claims over ice, like in the Northwest Passage?
A good point again. I wouldn't like to see that as a conflict. I think it's important to integrate traditional law coming from the Inuit into our own Canadian system, but I don't see that as two different systems. I don't think that would be a good approach to it. I think the Inuit, they're Canadians, they're part of the Canadian law system, and their traditions in terms of law aspects and everything, that should be incorporated naturally into our own law system. And we just did that in Quebec, actually, with the customary adoption law. We took what the Inuit do as customary adoption. We had a law on that passed by the National Assembly of Quebec. So it's now part of our own law system in Quebec, the civil code system. So there's a way to do it, but you need, again, to have open-minded. And it's easy to say, but it's not that easy to have it achieved. So you need to have people with a lot of respect for each other, and that's usually how we do it. And of course, there is some conflict sometimes, unfortunately, but when it happens, you have to look at it from a different perspective, I think. If you have a very narrow look at how it should be done within our own existing Canadian law, well, it's not going to work, because usually the laws are the laws of the conquerors. So when you win over somebody, you impose your own laws, and that's exactly what happened, historically speaking, within Canada. Well, this should change, and I think our global Canadian law system should be open enough to integrate any traditional law that would come from any Indigenous people across the country once again.
Great. Thank you very much for your time.
Thanks to you.